Hello, this is the voice of Stewart Pearce, and welcome to Deep Dialogues, a series of vital conversations that I have with global soul stewards from all over the world who provide us with an understanding of how we can create a new hierarchy of values that is absolutely significant at this unique time of becoming. I hope you enjoy, and thanks for listening. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We have the most stunning lady sitting here on the panel this evening. May I please introduce you to the wonderful Rebecca Campbell. Hi, Rebecca. It's great to have you.
Hi, Stewart. Hi, everyone.
We were just in our pre-show chat, we were just reflecting on the fact that we haven't seen each other about 3 years because Rebecca and her wonderful husband came on retreat to Egypt, which was the penultimate before obviously had to stop running retreats in Egypt. There are people going, according to Ashraf, but it's just too complex trying to persuade people to come. So hopefully this time next year, things will be much clearer. However, everybody, I want to officially introduce you to the wonderful Rebecca. So Rebecca Campbell is a writer, a poet, a mystic, artist, ritualist, and mother. Her creations are dedicated to weaving the soul back into everyday life. Born originally in Australia, in fact, although she lives in the United Kingdom, we see her in Sydney today, wherever we are in the world. And Rebecca otherwise lives in Glastonbury, UK, and fascinated by the great mysteries. Rebecca answered an inner call to the sacred sites of her ancestry at the age of 18. She has undergone several initiatory awakenings and experiences. And prior to her sharing her visions through her oracles and books, Rebecca was an award-winning creative director. And so when did you eventually leave your creative directorship and venture forth into spirit?
So full time, it was around 2011, so properly 2012. So 2010 to 2012 was when it all kind of, the double surfboards, stepping out of the spiritual closet first began. Yeah. And I was in London then.
And so you'd moved by that time from Australia to London.
Yeah, I moved around 2007. So I've lived in the UK quite a long time. I always I did a couple of trips which were I look back now and I see that I was going to sacred sites and connecting with the stones and the temples, but I didn't really understand what I was doing at that stage. I was just following that kind of inner call, and you look back and you're like, oh gosh, we don't need to worry about trusting the plan. The plan is there. But then, yeah, came back to Australia and did my studies and became a creative, like writer and art director, and then moved to London. And I just knew I wanted to kind of see the world, be part of the world, and yeah. And I was working in advertising for quite a few years, and it was the classic story of following the goals that I'd always had, doing the things that we're always told to do, and year by year, month by month, having that niggling feeling that this is not the life that I really came here to live. I'd always been very passionate and fascinated by the great mysteries. Like the first books I would read were like Kubler-Ross's On Death and Dying. I just didn't understand why people weren't fascinated by that. But I very much saw it as like just the passion, this separate kind of world. And so it was around the 2010 where I realized I was actually more qualified in this passion than even my career. And yeah, and it was about gathering up the courage really to share the voice more than anything. And I know that's your work in the world as well, helping people find their voice. And yeah, I think sometimes it drops in when it's meant to.
Mm, mm. What do you feel was the first big initiatory experience that triggered a complete awakening within you?
So I'd say the first one, and this is the one I really didn't understand. So this was early on in my teens. I read about a girl similar-ish age to me who had passed away, and felt very connected to her. And through some very serendipitous experiences, the next day I was at school sharing with one of my best friends. I showed this magazine article and said, I can't stop thinking about this. And I feel like I need to find the mum and I need to meet the mum. And I said it to my friend I was sitting next to, and then she looked up and pointed and said, the mum is there.
Oh,
And we ended up developing a really deep friendship, and a couple of other relationships like that followed, where it seemed like I was connecting with the spirit of the child who'd passed over. Um, and what it initiated in me was these deep connections with these people who had faced the worst thing that you could ever face, and um, really communing with the other worlds. And I would sit with them and just watch the grief and watch the communication with the other world as well. And then we would, they were kind of like my spiritual running buddies, and they really initiated my spiritual path. And so they'd take me to all their workshops that they were going to. Would read books together. And so that was the first one, which back then I didn't understand at all. And it was this combination of like feeling like this whole other world had opened up that felt more familiar to me than the previous one, but also at the same time, this big separation. So kind of like the awakening happening, but feeling more disconnected from my normal life as well. And so it felt like there were these two worlds happening at once.
mm,
And so looking back now, I think it's taken pretty much until my late 30s, going into my 40s, to properly weave those two fully together, fully integrate. I look back and around that 2010 to 2012 period, I had a huge Kundalini experience, which was positive. It was at the end of huge heartbreak and cracked open and, saying yes to that. But that was very physical. And I began seeing codes and things like that in nature. But that was ultimately ecstatic.
mm,
And then actually just recently, post giving birth to my son, I had a similar thing, but it felt like it was the opposite, almost like ancestral trauma release. And so it was more in the
mm,
excruciating sense, but it was the same symptoms with the
mm,
physical shaking, etc.
mm,
So yeah, I really believe that the awakening process never ever ends.
mm.
And yeah, the spiritual journey is called life.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It was beautifully put. Because I've just finished a 2-day weekend retreat where I was reminding everybody that we're part of an infinitely unfolding creative possibility full of love and joy.
Mm,
So therefore, the cycles of nature carry us, the cycles of the great galactic presences, so to speak, within our galaxy, within our universe. They create these cycles of energy. So there is a point of completion that we call death, and then there's a resurrection and a rebirth, and it's continuous all the time. So it's fascinating what you were saying about the birth of your son, which is
mm.
now 2.5 years ago.
Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting. I haven't shared this with you, Stuart, but my son, I was getting the call. I was never someone who was heart set on being a mother. I assumed I would, but it didn't feel like it was a deal breaker. And then around the time that we went to Egypt
Mm,
together, um,
mm,
I had my husband and I had gotten I could feel the soul just kind of around. I hadn't really made connection, but it was actually in the Temple of Hathor that I made that connection, and I received very, very, very clearly. I kind of split off from the group, and I ended up, right up the top. And I'm not sure if they're the chambers, but it was there's lots of, because I think with Hathor you see the womb in her face,
Yes.
but also the stars, and this. And I remember prior to going to Egypt, different scholars talking about, no, it's just the womb, it's the feminine, it's very physical, versus galactic. And I couldn't quite work out which one, because it felt like both. That was my experience anyway. And laying there on the ground, I was looking up, and you can feel that it was azure blue or midnight blue, even though the colors aren't there, and the stars. And what I received there, I connected with my son for the first time. And what I received laying there was birth is a portal, your body is a portal. And I saw the connection with the womb being literally like, if you can, through the birth, open yourself up to the energy of the entire universe moving through you, that is what will happen. And that was definitely my experience in the end. Yeah. Yeah. I didn't, for someone who was, I've spent so much of my life committed to my spiritual experiences, I hadn't seen birth as that. I saw it as a possibility, but oh my gosh, it was the most everything, the physical experience of birth, and just so physical, and also transcendent at the same time. And I know everyone's birth is different, and I think that the babies choose that, because I do see birth as like a blueprint, an imprint for us. But yeah, I really I created a card actually in my Starseed oracle of that temple, and it's the mother's milk type card. But yeah, it was such a palpable experience there. I think that and the Temple of Isis were my favorite places. And also, I don't know if you remember that little monastery we went to.
Yes.
It was, I don't think we were meant to go there. I've thought about that so much, that place.
Oh, it was because there was a disturbance in the tomb of I, wasn't there?
Yeah.
And I felt really thwarted, because we started, then we had to finish because the custodian, the guards were being so difficult. Oh gosh, they love to create points of resistance. However, moving through, flowing through. And so I said to Ashraf, look, why don't we go to this extraordinary temple, which actually, when I first discovered it, it was actually very muted. And over the years, particularly over the last 15 years, it's got stronger and stronger and stronger in its vibration. Yeah, and it was dedicated to Isis. So there was a whole community of the priestesses of Isis living in the land around that temple.
Wow. Yeah, I definitely had that experience being there, and it felt like stepping into that temple. It was just so simple and basic, but so strong. And I'd always had this, I guess you'd call it like a memory of walking the land, and almost like the entire planet, and just knowing where we needed to be when, and just arriving all at the same time. And I had that experience with a very dear friend of mine. She is now, but I didn't know her at the time. And I just all of a sudden left London and called up my husband and said, I need to go to Glastonbury. I just went to go to the park, and I ended up going there, and we met. And it was, I have that memory of a time or times when we would do that. Do you have similar memories?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, I was just reflecting on what you were saying about the Temple of Hathor. It's interesting that it's the only temple where one can gain access to the roof. And I always feel that the mysteries on the roof, on the roofs of these temples, are almost as exquisite as what one finds within the womb of the temple. Because one moves into the aerial connection with the stars. And of course, the room
Mm.
that you were in was in the Venus birthing room
No
of
way.
Temple, and that's so I always find that very, very amusing, because that's where evidently the temple is overshadowed by Venus. I feel that
Wow.
Hathor came from Venus. And I remember many years ago when I met three Hathors who came to me for very profound teaching about 20 or 25 years ago. And that, I mean, that was a major experience. They hung around for about 3 weeks, giving me a lot of information that I now dispatch whenever it is appropriate.
Mm.
And they used Venus. They were ultra terrestrial. I'd never heard the term before. So they weren't extraterrestrial in the sense of living within our galaxy, but other than this planetary form. They came in and used Venus, which apparently is a very magnetic springboard for extraterrestrial or ultra terrestrial travelers. They used it to come in to visit planet Earth. So the interconnection is quite extraordinary, because the room in which you were in, I don't know if you can remember that shaft that goes through the ceiling.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
that goes straight up to Venus.
Wow. See, that's so interesting, because both my son and I have Venus in Scorpio, which is, you know about that. Yeah. So it's like sent by the goddess.
Yes.
And yeah, and where we are here, where I was born, actually, I'm visiting family here. In the night sky, the only star that you see, it's so bright. Like I know Venus is bright normally, but it is about 10 times bigger and brighter here, because it is on the Venus line. And I've been really reflecting on that the presence of Venus the past couple of months, actually, while I've been here. So yeah, it does feel like another door opening. I haven't I think I've had a little bit of experience with Venus, but it's felt like it's just kind of been there rather than something that I've actively learned about or yeah. So I'm curious.
Well, what's apropos what you've shared with us thus far, it seems that whenever spirit speaks, you are absolutely in the most appropriate place at the most appropriate time for these
Mm,
wonderful awakenings to take place. Because,
mm,
I feel that there's a vast stirring, if I may say, within the consciousness of what we're describing for you about Venus, and that once you leave Australia and you come back to the United Kingdom, there's a huge project there which is going to be really fascinating.
mm,
Of course,
mm,
it's I'd love to know more about what you left, because I know COVID was probably affecting your work in the sense of doing everything online rather than in person, as it were,
mm,
with people in front of one. But how you were feeling the work beginning to gestate and grow and evolve, because my
mm,
understanding, am I accurate, is that one of the great contributions that you make to our lives is by really allowing the feminine to come forth, and so much of your ministry is to do with the awakening of the divine feminine, the arousal of the divine feminine, and of course Hathor
mm,
and Venus would configure as being overlighting presences.
That's really beautiful. Yeah, I think so often there are these symbols in your life or muses that you maybe don't realize that they are until you look back and then you go, oh my gosh, it's been there all along. So last year, the project I was really working on was something that was so dear to my heart, but just so part of me that I didn't see it until then. And that was the rose, the mystical symbol of the rose.
Mm, mm,
Around that 2010 time in London, it's probably around 2008. When I was really, really kind of my heart was beginning to kind of release the things, the barriers, and the ways that I was kind of clinging to the perfectly constructed life that I was desperately trying to hold together. And the message I received during that time was to buy myself flowers, which seemed to me just very superficial and kind of not good enough guidance. But I knew enough about intuition at that stage to know to trust it. And so I would take myself to the local flower market and buy myself flowers. And that's when I discovered the peony, and that's when I discovered the English rose. I had no idea about the English rose. And little by little, week by week, I then began to discover the beautiful English gardens, which again, growing up in Australia, it's not a thing here. You go to the beach, you go to the bush, but you don't go. You go to if you're going to the gardens, you're essentially going to the park for kids to play. And so this whole new world opened up, and I discovered the Queen Mary's Gardens in Regent's Park, and that was really where I discovered the connection with beauty and nature, and this innate connection, which I think that we all have as children, to hear the whispers through nature. And so every day I would show up and walk around the trees, but particularly in those gardens, and my breath would be constantly taken away. And little by little, I began to hear the whispers and write them down. And week after week, I started sharing that writing, and that was really where it all began for me, to get the courage to share the voice. And I really didn't feel like it was me speaking. It was really me asking a question and getting an answer. And yeah, I'll never forget the moment where I was sitting there on my favorite park bench in Regent's Park, and I had pressed file and save on the book that I was writing, and could not believe that I'd written a book, and just put the laptop down and looked up and realized I was right in the center of Regent's Park Rose Garden, where I'd written the whole thing. And wow. And so the roses have always been there with me. David Austin roses are the roses that they use, who, I found out after he was a poet himself, and he wrote with the roses too. And then years and years later, very spontaneously, actually straight after us being in Egypt, it was just before we went to Egypt, we were planning to move back to Australia, and then we got called to Glastonbury and we were going to rent, and we ended up buying a place there, and then got on the plane to Egypt, and we're like, oh my gosh, we live in Glastonbury now. So we went from Egypt to Glastonbury, and that's where our new home was. My son came soon after. But what I didn't know then was the house that we had bought, which we knew in an instant. After looking for years in London, in an instant we knew. It actually used to be called the Old Rose Cottage. Huh. And the woman who owned it five owners ago, it was just full on roses, and David Austin roses, as well as the Gallica, which is the most ancient rose, which of course is the symbol. 5-petal rose is the symbol of the goddess. And week by week, the old neighbors would come and say, you're bringing back the Rose Cottage. And it took us a long time to understand what that even meant. So this theme of the roses kept on coming back to me. And so last year, particularly during COVID, I just got really clearly that just be with the roses. And so I created an oracle with the roses. And it's interesting, Venus, of course, plays a big role in that, as well as Sophia, and like so many of the goddesses. The rose has been this secret symbol of the ancient mother. And so that's been an unexpected thing that's come out of COVID, which has just brought so much joy. I've just loved every part of it.
That's amazing. What a wonderful story. So, you can hear, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome all of you wonderful people that are listening in. It's not that I've been ignoring you. I've just been magnetized by Rebecca, because I haven't seen her for 3 years. And a lot has ensued, as we know, through the global crisis of COVID. So there are 1 or 2 people who are actually in Sydney, which is wonderful. So welcome.
Amazing.
There are quite a lot of you in the chat box, so I'm not going to go through a roll call. But you can hear what Rebecca's talking about, how the principal awakening started occurring through her early years in Australia, but then really came into focus around 2009, 10, 11, 12. And of course, as we know from a cosmic point of view, this is when there were great cosmic cycles shifting in the heavens, leading to December the 21st, 2012, which was the precession of the equinoxes, which occurs every 26,755 years, where all the planets line up in a direct line to draw us into alignment with the galactic heart, which is always seen as a beautiful rose.
Mm.
And then, you know, as you were going through the wonderful, not catalogue, but the chronicle of your times, as it were, the whole idea of the fact that all the mysteries about the divine feminine, all of the wonderful craft skills, which we would refer to as being witchery, meaning wise woman, were always entranced or enchanted beneath the rose. They were known as sub rosa. Therefore, they were protected, which is why in medieval buildings, you can actually see it in the bakehouse of Glastonbury Abbey. You know, there are these roses. So anything that was esoteric took place beneath the rose, and therefore they were protected, ostensibly protected. What I feel now, and I have another link with Isis and Hathor for you. I feel that what's happening now is that the rose has been lifted so that the inner secrets that were held within, or beneath rather, sub rosa, subsumed, can be released. And what's wonderful is that your spirito physicality is so open that, as you were saying, you pick up the whisperings and the murmurings of all these energies moving through you. So it makes absolute sense. You know, in 2012, I was introduced in the Temple of Isis. I was introduced to the priestesses of Isis by a whole series, I won't go into it, but a whole series of unusual happenings that were all completely supernatural. And the final one was when I walked into the Temple of Isis, and there was the white flame of Isis, with a white rose in the very center of it.
Yeah.
And then coming back to the United Kingdom after that retreat, the emails just kept pouring in from women all over the world saying, I've been told that you all know about the white rose, white rose, etc., etc. So we can talk offline, because I much prefer to my voice about the awakenings thereof. You know, the white flame is the high vibrational ritualized form of behavior that Isis is giving us at the moment. Right at the very core of it is unconditional love. And how can we dispatch that, so to speak, through human consciousness, particularly in the curing or the healing of the revenge complex, so that forgiveness and mercy and divine grace pour through. And I feel it's you extraordinary women, particularly someone like yourself, who's so awakened to the nature of the womb of intensity, the galactic womb opening within you to bring forth this information, that you'll be leading us in your understanding of how we can become more loving, how we can become more caring, more inclined to co-creativity and collaboration through mutual respect and common decency, rather than so much of the caustic or vitriolic behavior that takes place within the revenge complex. You know, so many interweavings and interconnectivities. So when are you going to write more about the rose?
Yeah, I've been asked to write a book on it, and so yeah, that's definitely part of the plan. And yeah, the guidebook for the oracle is actually was quite more thorough than I would normally, because there's just so much material in there. But yeah, there will be a book on it. And yeah, what's been kind of dropping in since I've been here actually is you know, when I moved here, there were a couple of courses that I was offering, and while I know they're helpful, they just didn't feel in alignment anymore. Like my biggest one as well, which did not make sense from a business perspective, but I just knew it was time to just kind of like take it off the shelf and So then since I've been here, the new body of work has like dropped in, which is a mystery school. So the Inner Temple Mystery School. So I'll be spending most of 2022 working on that, which I feel really excited about. And that's really about the working with the elements and yeah, it really is weaving those two worlds back together that I spoke about before, and like seeing the sacred in the physical, in nature, and us as nature, etc. And the because I think that I'd had so many, like you say, galactic experiences that it was kind of hard to work out how to integrate it into the physical. And I know like the body takes care of it, but it felt like these two separate worlds again. And was actually, I wrote a book called Letters to a Starseed, which I was asked to write that book. And I said to my publisher, all I'm getting, because it was post-birth as well, I said, all I'm getting is returning to the earth. And so I don't know how. But then every time I prayed on it and I got my team to pray on it, it was like, no, you need to write this book. And so in the end, Letters to a Starseed is really about planting ourselves here. And really, like, it's about the mysteries of the seed, and that the stars and the seed are the same. You know, the earth is cosmic itself. And so, yeah, there's been a lot of kind of weavings happening during these COVID times, because I wrote that at the beginning of COVID as well.
Wow, how fascinating, you know, because again, point of synchronicity, because this weekend's retreat that I've just been facilitating was called The Starseeds Awaken. And it's because hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people have come to me, particularly over the last 4 or 5 years, saying, I don't feel I'm from here. Why am I experiencing so many physiological challenges, emotional challenges, or directional misrouting, so to speak? You know, I was able to piece it together, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. So eventually a number of people said, would you just do a retreat about starseeds?
That's amazing. Well, yeah, because I definitely had that feeling of like longing for home without knowing where it was, and just that kind of feeling of being misplaced in the world. And I remember when I first learnt about the concept Starseed, it was like, oh my God, these visions that I've had, which are more like they're memories. They're not just kind of, you know, from watching TV or something. Yeah, but it's interesting. Back then, when I first learned and started studying about starseeds, and I would do readings and starseeds to come with me and to me and all of that, I was adamant that only some souls are starseeds. I don't know the answer anymore, because I'm like, are we all? Like, is the soul literally that? Like, is that? And I know some of us come on particular waves with collective missions, etc., etc. But are we all? What do you think?
Absolutely, unquestionably. And the reason for me saying this is because of all the steeping that has occurred in my life over the last, particularly over the last 35, 40 years, with the substance of Atlantis, always feeling myself to be an Atlantean, being directed in that, you know, in that position of thought or discovery by Saint Germain 45 years ago, and then meeting the Angels of Atlantis. So I write in the book, The Angels of Atlantis, that all the Atlanteans, and there were probably about 144,000 people living in each of the 12 communities throughout Atlantis, they all knew where they were from, and they all knew that they were from the stars, and that they'd chosen to be here, to be part of the cosmic experiment of populating planet Earth and finding ways of living a 12 helix DNA, bringing spirit totally into the density of flesh, the density of weight, space, and time, effectively. And knowing that this was the only planet of choice, so the binary system was fully open to them. Whereas as soon as we move into intergalactic travel, the binary system, you know, just finishes. So unquestionably, you know, and I found the work of Whitaker. I don't know if you're familiar with Whitaker, the great composer. He's really extraordinary. He's an American, but lives in the United Kingdom, lives in Europe. And he's just recently created a symphony with a choir, and it's all virtual. It's called Deep Field. So he uses films of going into, through Hubble, of going through the stars, so star systems, constellations, whatever. And then suddenly all of these wonderful faces appear singing this extraordinary chorus that have all been recorded virtually. So it's almost
Wow.
as though these two images of us, that there are a myriad of images of people's voices, and he weaves them all into a choir of seraphic proportion. And as I was watching it, because we used it as an introduction, just a few moments of introduction for the retreat, I was so deeply moved because I realized that all of these faces were star seeds, because they appear in the film to emerge out of the galaxy or to emerge out of another star system other than planet Earth. And here they come together to join in one of the greatest energies that we have, which is the power of sound.
Wow.
I'll find a link and I'll send it to you, you know, so that you can have a look at it. I think you'll
Oh,
be
I'd love that. Thank you.
excited and enhanced and edified and enchanted by it. And for
Wow.
anybody else, I'll make sure that it's within either my Facebook page or the YouTube recording of this wonderful deep dialogue. There was a question I wanted to ask you, and it's gone from my mind. Back to starseeds. Yeah. What do you feel about the rose in relation to star seeds? Do you feel that the rose is emblematic or iconic in, you know, you're referring to star seeds, but how can the seed of our star nationhood, which is other than planet Earth, we're assuming, how that can be gravitationally localized on planet Earth so that we feel that we are secured in the way that we have chosen to be secured? Because one of the things that I'm sure you experienced as well with many star seeds is that they experience a sense of lightness or lightheadedness, particularly during major cosmic cycles, the solstices, the equinoxes, or on full moons, and that they never felt themselves to be fully grounded and had difficulty connecting with the weight, the substance, the density of some forms on planet Earth. And as soon as they found a direct seeding in their own right, and particularly like yourself, you know, intuitively being drawn to where they needed to be. You obviously needed to be in Glastonbury, and the house came to you. And as you were saying, the frustration of trying to find a place of grounding or rooting in London, and it being completely elusive. And then suddenly you arrive in Glastonbury. It's sort of like the first or the second house that you've actually seen, and it has one of the oldest rose gardens in the town. You know, just extraordinary. And of course, as we know, the rose is a great, that Glastonbury is often known as the English rose because of its association with the ancient island of Albion, is how the Celts referred to what we now call the United Kingdom. Yeah, the rose. Which is your favorite rose?
Oh, I mean, definitely a David Austin because of the scent and the softness of the petals. Oh my gosh, he was certainly a rose whisperer. That's my favorite. But geeking over my research now, I do love a Gallica, which was, you know, another name for that. It's like wild rose, dog rose. So they're the ones that they don't really look like what we see as the classic rose. I've always liked the ones that look like they grow in a garden rather than from a florist, like those perfect tight ones. I've never liked them. But yeah, in answer to your question before of like the link between, I guess it's the rose, but it's really like nature and earth and the starseed and these times that we're living in. I think that this message of plant yourself here is what has been coming, and seed your light as well came before that. But plant yourself here feels a lot simpler. I do find that a lot of us starseeds, and again, it's all of us, it's just whether we remember that we are or not, it can feel like, I do find that the awakening process is amazing. It's amazing, but it's also excruciating too, because there's this loss of who we thought we were and this place in the world, and then these endless questions that we're not actually able to answer for sure. And so, yeah, anyone who is just like the awakening process is amazing and it's all great, I don't agree with that. It can be, and so I think that one of the most important things is to realize that actually just being here is enough. Like each of us, if we imagine us like seeds, Sophia, which is the feminine presence, that if you look at Michelangelo's the Sistine Chapel, you can see the whisper into God's ear. And I see Sophia as the, and I've actually got Sophia just here. I don't know if you can see with the celestial rose. I see her as like the blueprint, and each of us as being seeds, as having that blueprint within us, just like the baby who's in the womb, just like the seed that's in the soil. It has the codes within it. We all have the codes within us because we're part of life. And so, sometimes it can feel like we've been planted somewhere that we're like, what am I even doing here? Like I don't belong here. None of my people are here. We have no understanding of what impact just us being in one physical place actually has. And so I think that as starseeds, as we awaken, we can feel this huge pressure to kind of like figure out what we're here for, work out how to move through something, and just, everything to be fine. But sometimes just literally you as a soul being planted in a particular body that has a particular ancestral history at a particular period of time is revolutionary and creating huge changes within the whole world, within the whole universe, within beyond that. I think particularly now we've seen it as we're going through something so huge collectively. What I've noticed personally, and then also with lots of people, pretty much everyone that I've been speaking to, is there's such a karmic and ancestral trauma release happening, that as and as we're all getting triggered and everything's so divisive, and it's like, this happened, well, I didn't do that, my ancestors did that, it's not my, all of that kind of stuff. Just us staying with an open heart through all of this is revolutionary. It really is. And so that collective energy can move through. I'm not sure about you, Stewart, but there was a period for me where very unexpectedly I'd just wake up every night and it was like I was a volcano erupting. It was as the world was on fire seemingly everywhere, in every single corner. And so I think we're all part of that release, that part of that metamorphosis, and no matter, like the caterpillar turning into the butterfly, which is, I know it's such a classic, like cliche metaphor, but it's true. If you split it open while it's happening, it's just organs and gunk. And I think that, we're all going through some sort of that collectively right now. And I do believe in the intelligence within it all. I don't understand it, but I believe in it.
Well, yes, so the awakening is so extraordinary that all the dimensions of our experience are really being elasticated. As a result of that, our cells awaken. I mean, this is not necessarily a very overt scientific referencing, but it's the way that it feels to me from an intuitive point of view. And as our cells are awakening, it feels to me that what we're preparing, particularly those of us that have move through devotion, dedication, and discipline to live as part of the spiritual revolution. So we let go of the old modus of being, which for me is always to do with what do you want to be? What do you want to be seen as in the world, rather than who are you and whose are you? You know, that we're all children of the divine. And that as this happens, we begin to realize that we have a huge choice or a gentle responsibility, when I'm not a hefty responsibility, but what I mean by responsibility really being the ability to respond to a higher calling of devotion, whereby we can actually feel that often when we're experiencing discomfort or disorientation or dis-ease within our bodies as way showers, as spiritual beings having human experience, that what we're actually doing is ending vast fields of family constellatory karma, but at the same time, what the other imprints are that our fellow human beings are experiencing. So it's a huge gift in many ways, because with this awareness, we can rearrange the whole of our cellular functioning by recognizing what the theme of the ancestral karma is. It can be released through our light body really fast to bring about immense healings, physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. And as a result, we are holding either within our hearts, or you ladies within your wombs, the possibility of a planetary healing of vast proportion. And it's really coincidental that here we are, but of course nothing is a coincidence in the sense of it's not meant to happen, that here we are on the brink of an extraordinary solstice, particularly in the Northern Hemisphere, which, as we know, we're all being called to this point of portal, where if we can bring 144,000 people together with this one singular intention of let's all live through co-creativity, harmony, mutual respect, and opening the heart to the possibility of what our love is all about. So we release judgment and we move into discernment, that we can actually beacon a force of light all around the planet that will draw star nations in to have open concourse with us, so that we can really decide what we want to do with some of the more disturbing or ugly aspects of our societies, as we see the central organizing principles beginning to break down. And evidently they're feeling a tremendous amount of fear because they're realizing that they are no longer in control of us. I mean, this is a very simplistic way of putting it, but I keep reminding everybody that, for example, just before COVID, the year before COVID, and through COVID, the percentage of people that have claimed self-employmency, the percentage of people that have actually moved into becoming entrepreneurs of a multiple source income, divided creativity, is beyond 80%. So we're leaving all of those centrifugal forces to interpret what our own creative energy is all about. If we can do this with open-heartedness, if we can do this with joy in our step, and with the knowledge that we either have a guardian angel or the force of Chiron, the great healer, as with all the ascended masters and mistresses and our fond spirit guardians to assist us, we're onto something really, really big. And then we move away from the torpid narcissism that so many of us are guilty of feeling, I included. Yeah, it's a very extraordinary time. And I again lean into the mystery of the whisperings of the divine feminine, and how it seems to me that the rose is just so special. My mother was a great gardener and she was a rose specialist, but I always remember that on speech day, those prize giving opportunities, and this was in junior school, that I loathed schooling, and I found it very difficult to be the person that I was as a young child, because I saw the multidimensional universe. I saw the preternatural world. I thought everybody saw it when I was a young innocent and spoke about it, to see horror on people's faces. I mean, I didn't know that's what it was called, but I could see that they were darkened by the experience rather than enlightened by it.
Mm.
But every single speech day, I remember the hall where we were receiving prizes in front of the whole school. It was filled with roses, and the roses were from my favorite teacher's garden, who is this
Mm.
extraordinary lady that was just the personification of the Divine Mother. Unconditional love, compassion, empathy, and all the roses were from her garden. And I remember,
Mm.
standing next to this huge vase full of roses and smelling them, and her coming up to me. I mean, I must have been 6 or 7, and saying, "Stewart, what are you doing?" And I said, "I love these roses. Oh, you should come to my garden." And so I remember this special expedition where this wonderful teacher, whose name escapes me, I think it was Mrs. Kelly, spoke with my mother and organized for us all to go and have tea, because she lived somewhere
Oh,
just to see the rose garden. And here was this 150-foot rose garden of nothing but roses. So I have,
wow.
I could go on and on and on about how roses just seemed to appear in my early life.
That's so beautiful. And I think I mean, that's such a, I love hearing that as well, because it's such a classic English story. I'm sure people in Australia and America are like, oh my gosh, you had tea in the rose garden.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely something that I've found through talking to people about roses. We've all got our own story of it. Like, she's known as the queen of the flowers. And yeah, I mean, I feel like just having the presence of a rose around us, it takes our breath away. And I think that in the similar, like, it's a gateway to the soul, for the soul to be more fully here, just like poetry is, like music is, it's art is, it brings us here. It's like the horizontal and vertical. Really good wine and coffee is as well. Food. It brings the two together. Yeah, it's yeah, they're so beautiful.
Ladies and gentlemen, as you listen to the wonder of what Rebecca's revealing, do feel free to ask any questions. I know one of the questions that's in the forefront of my consciousness is, where do we find your books and oracles?
Well, you could head over to my website, which is rebeccacampbell.me. But if not, they're everywhere. They're, Amazon and all of those bookstores. So I've got 3 books and 3 oracles.
And amazon.co.uk and amazon.com.
Yeah, all
Yeah.
over. And Booktopia in Australia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, we'll make sure that we actually place Rebecca's website. You probably heard it, Rebecca Campbell, www.rebeccacampbell.me. So it's very easy to find. Yeah, don't go online right now. And so when you return to the United Kingdom, you'll be embarking on the next stage of the project.
Exactly, yeah. And I'm also working on a new oracle on water, so the healing sacred qualities of water. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that, because I go to the Red and White Springs most mornings, and yeah, it's interesting. I'm being so happy where I am here, but I have noticed since being here, I can kind of feel the connection to Avalon. I know you have a connection there as well.
Yeah, very, very, very big, and have for many years. There we are. We have it on the
Thank
screen.
you.
Yeah, absolutely vast. And in fact, for the summer solstice of this past year, I conducted an online retreat, which was all about the mystical presence of the rose in Michael Mary traditions.
Oh, wow.
If you've met Tara, have you met the Tarath in Glastonbury? Have you met? This is a living human being who happens to be a man. He used to
No.
be called Jeff Boltwood, but he actually claimed he was given the term Tarath, which is a very ancient Celtic name. Tarath is somebody that I've worked with for nearly 40 years. and has become a great friend. And Tareth had a series of mystical experiences in Glastonbury. He now lives there, of course. He lives on the dragon's back, so to speak, in just before Street, and he this would have been in 92, 93. He and a group of us were called to a sacred site just south of the Tor, where we sat in a circle and meditated. And a fissure opened in the circle before us, and he put his hand in and pulled out a crystal, which he has. He has half of the total crystal. The other half is in the ground, which is a very extraordinary thing when one meets it. I'll send you a photograph of it, because he
Wow.
allowed me to interview him on camera and to talk about this crystal. He refers to it as being the Grail crystal. And so he has the male half, whereas the feminine half is still actually within the soil. In all, it would probably be about a meter long. And
Wow.
interestingly, it is quartz. It has a serrated edge, and we believe that it was actually Excalibur. It was actually
Wow.
and Excalibur wasn't a sword. It was the acupuncture pin that went into the soil to create unification through the heart chakra that Glastonbury is, and all the other nodes around the planet. So I'll make sure that you have connection with him, because
Thank
he
you.
has a lot of very extraordinary information.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, I've had huge mystical connection with Glastonbury over the years. 35 years ago, it's where I met the Angels of Atlantis during the harmonic convergence, which was, it was completely far from my consciousness. I mean, I was really going through a huge revolution of energy, where I knew that my spirituality was burgeoning and had been really from 83. But it meant that I also needed to find a way of negotiating my way out of the major relationship that I was in, because my partner just simply was not in dancing with spirit at all. He thought that I was absolutely crazy, saying that I had 12 angels. So a year later, of course, we had to find a way of separating, and that's when the fervor of the supernatural world really returned to me. My third eye sprang open, and I began to realize that I'd been shown so much as a small child, which through adolescence I'd switched off from, simply because I needed to learn a 3D language. I was not easy in the world, and I was immensely isolated, borderline autistic, severely synesthetic, with profound dyslexia. And so I found ways of being able to move through the world, and hey, suddenly I became successful. So yes, Glastonbury has always represented for me rebirth, death and rebirth, resurrection. And in 2022, I'm going to spend a lot of time there working with somebody who's a dear friend who channels this disincarnate being called Zach. So we're going to have fun bringing through
Oh, great. Well, feel free to reach out. It'd be great
Oh,
to
I
see
will.
you.
I will. Any questions? Oh, Ruby. I don't know Ruby, so it's lovely to meet you. What advice can you give to those who feel that they're seen as crazy and odd when they want to talk about spirituality, the universe, or indeed starseeds? Any advice? Oh, there's Ruby. Hi, Ruby.
Hi, Ruby. So the first advice I'd say is pick your audience. Don't try and convert people who aren't interested. Just in the same way as, I don't know, my husband wouldn't talk about how obsessed he is with cricket with someone who doesn't like cricket. Just pick your audience, because, yeah, I think that we're able to... So, for example, if you are wanting to have a connection with someone a little bit more deeply and they're not that open to it, the best way to do it is through your vibration, rather than trying to change their mind or convince them of things. So, yeah,
Oh,
I'd say don't try.
beautiful answer. Beautiful, beautiful answer. Can you perhaps just expand slightly on the nature of vibrational communication rather than overt speech when a person is in contention?
So an example of that would be, so let's just say that you are meditating every day and you're having direct communication and downloads about the universe. You don't have to tell them about those downloads, but just keep experiencing them. and they'll probably say to you, wow, you're in a good mood today, or gosh, something's changed. What is it? And you can say, for example, oh, thanks for asking. I've been loving my meditations. And then you don't have to keep on talking. And they can ask you questions. And then you can reveal.
Janie is saying that she's been loving what you've been talking about. I moved recently to a house with a garden full of roses that are 60 years old. So I'm really looking forward to seeing them bloom in the spring. And of course, the rose of all flowers actually has a very long life expectancy if the bush itself is looked after. I had an interesting Irish barrister come to me the other day who I first worked with about 15 years ago when she was wanting to go to the bar. And she did indeed do, it was very successful. It was obviously part of her soul's trajectory that she needed to. But then she got to a point where she realized that something huge was shifting within her. And interestingly, particularly within her womb, she thought it perhaps was to do with lower chakra. And of course, there was a lot of movement in the lower chakra, but it was particularly to do with her womb. And as she met this wonderful man, they decided to get married. And within a very short period of time, there she was pregnant. But the morning of discovering her pregnancy, she walked out into her rose garden. And where there was a cardinal red rose bush that had been there for at least 120 years, in the center of the rose bush, the deep, deep red roses was a white rose.
Wow.
And that was the morning that she discovered that she was pregnant with this she-child who has turned out to be this extraordinary child. The following morning, the white rose was gone. So again, it's the white rose of Isis, that here is Isis providing, or her sister Sophia, the goddess of wisdom, bringing in remarkable energies. Glastonbury has been referenced nearly daily in my life. Good, the magical synchronicities. So you must visit it, Kristen. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. What a wonderful conversation.
Very lovely.
They're absolutely beautiful. And it is the 13th conversation of these remarkable ladies that have joined me over the last season to finalize this year. And 13, of course, in ancient numerology is the number of spiritual transformation. So thank you so much, Rebecca. And to all of you, happy winter solstice, wherever you are in the world. And please, if you can, I'm going to be running a meditation for about half an hour online. We're anticipating hundreds and hundreds of people. So please go to my Facebook page, Stewart Pearce, Master of Voice, and you'll see it. All the information is there. Stay where you are, Rebecca. Thank you so much, Ryan. If we could just close down the lines.